The Earth's climate is changing. Small island developing states such as Tobago are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Increase in the Earth's temperature is causing more frequent, more intense, extreme weather events. Sea level rise threatens critical infrastructure and coastal assets. Decreased rainfall results in drought conditions and challenge our access to potable water for domestic and industrial use. These are just a few of the many risks climate change poses to Tobago. Tobago must become resilient to climate change impacts. Tobagonians must adapt. When you see them bloody me. In an attempt to understand Tobago's vulnerability to the impacts of climate change, a team from Environment Tobago embarked on a 2-month climate change vulnerability assessment project.
And we figured that we could start with a pilot of Lambeau. Alright, so this is that is piloting a Lambeau. But the idea is to use this knowledge and skill to apply it throughout Tobago. So we want to understand what the vulnerability is, and vulnerability is basically what will be the negative impact of climate change to the people, the environment, etc.
The Lambeau Lowlands Study Area is located on the southwestern coast of Tobago, nestled between the capital, Scarborough, and Crown Point. Natural and human assets in this area include the Tobago Plantations community and the Magdalena Grand, the largest hotel on the island.
They have a lot of special villas and isolated houses on that area with high quality, high value. And the hotel kind of hugs the coast and goes up towards a low-lying beach, which is basically isolated with a small forest in the back of it. That beach is frequented by kite surfers, frequented by fishermen, and other people who just want to enjoy the beach.
The Little Rockley Bay is one of the larger beaches in Tobago and is home to grey sands and stunning views of the island's beauty. The western side of the beach receives strong gusts from the ocean and is thus very popular with kite surfers and other kinds of water sports.
So I'm going to talk to the landlord. That's the landlord for the whole area down there.
Right, what about
Whichever now, that's Mr. Murphy, Paul Murphy, right? Or Bernard Sami. Still his manager, man. Hotel? Yeah.
Assessing Lambeau's vulnerability to climate change was a challenge for the CCVA team. However, this challenge was taken on using a multi-pronged approach.
We looked at about 3 or 4 methods, 3 different aspects, because it's a really multi-pronged approach we're using, right? So we started off with a review of what was done already, right? So we looked at some of the previous studies for climate change impact in Tobago, as well as Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. We also used surveys of the people who use these different areas of the Lambeau I mentioned. We surveyed them on what their knowledge, what their attitudes in relation to climate change are, as well as what they do in a day-to-day life and how it impacts their ability to be adapted to climate change. We also looked at a mapping analysis, a geographic information system analysis, or GIS analysis, where we took a lot of map data and analyzed the impact of climate change in Lambeau. And finally, we looked at environmental analysis. So we tried to account for what was in Lambeau, what types of flora and fauna, animals and plants could be found in Lambeau. So we used these four together to create the best case, we believe, analysis and best case understanding of Lambeau's adaptive capacity or vulnerability to climate change.
Do you personally, or does the organization have any assets within the study area that we talked about?
I no longer have any assets there, but there are members of the association that would.
By chance,
Well, Tobago Plantations is a member.
Right.
Magdalena is a member. There are other properties which I cannot remember at the moment, but they are members of the association.
There are two general responses in dealing with the challenge of climate change: mitigation and adaptation. Climate mitigation is any action to permanently eliminate or reduce the long-term risks and hazards of climate change to human life and property.
As a tourism person, we obviously want to keep tourism as an economic driver of the economy. Therefore, we will do everything we can to mitigate climate change issues, but it has to be within that economic framework because Tobago needs to earn a living. But interestingly, the aeroplanes and things have all become so much more efficient that the actual carbon produced is much less than it was even 5 years ago.
Climate adaptation, on the other hand, refers to the ability of a system, whether it's human or environmental, to adjust to climate change, to take advantage of opportunities, or to cope with the consequences. Since climate change is inevitable and there is little that Tobago could do by way of mitigation, Tobago must focus on adaptation measures.
But yes, there are a number of measures that can be taken. We waste an awful lot of water, we waste energy, we don't use solar power enough. The waste situation is terrible in Tobago. We need to start recycling and all of those things. One of the things I've asked with the Climate Smart program is to look at a way of building hotels, having a blueprint to build a hotel in the most environmentally sustainable way, and using that blueprint to suggest that's how in future all hotels and tourism partners build their properties.
In terms of the development of the coasts of Tobago, which is where most development is, we need to look at improving the building codes. We can look at developing an integrated coastal management, which is part and parcel, or rather it includes building codes in it, right? Because the idea here is looking at how the integration of development of the coast is a link to the environmental impacts. Right. And there are other things involved in there. But the more integrated we have this development pathway or these policies, the better it is for the island in the long run. Now, in terms of the things we can do to lessen these other stressors, the things that make climate change worse, obviously anything that affects our reef negatively is something we should look at. So there's a lot of wastewater that runs off the island and goes into the reef, and it's full of bacteria and nutrients that damage the reef and actually risk ourselves when we go into the water. Right. So these are things that we need to look at. In terms of temperature changes, these aren't something we can directly affect, but we can make the impacts less by dealing with mosquito breeding areas, right? So if we have areas that encourage mosquito breeding, we need to look at ways of reducing that. Another technique we can use is looking at ecosystem management, which is where you look at the benefits that nature provides to us directly, right? So mangroves provide the best example where they actually reduce flooding for the island and they protect us against storm surges and strong waves. So when we damage the mangroves, this actually reduces our own protection in the long run, right? So one thing we can do is ensure that mangroves are well protected, and this is not only a government task, right? But this actually overlaps with what individuals can do. Because when we pollute mangroves and we damage the mangroves and make them weaker, and this leads, of course, to making ourselves weaker and more susceptible to flooding, to damages to our property, and storms when they may arise. But also, managing our knowledge is also important, right? We need to educate ourselves on how our actions affect the environment and how they make climate change worse, right? So, whether it's constructing in a certain way, building a house in a certain way, maybe it's your workplace. In some of our surveys, we found that people were not seeing any changes in their workplace, any adaptation in their workplace to climate change. So maybe pushing your bosses, pushing your work environment to deal with climate change better could be a way forward. And finally, I would say demanding more from our leaders, because they are looking to us for the direction, for setting the direction of Tobago. We need to be the ones that demand of them which way we go, and that way might be making us more susceptible or more vulnerable to climate change or more resistant to it. So we need to be able to understand what the issues are and then demand of our leaders that they take the decisions to help us be more resilient.